Hello and a warm welcome to the CNBC Africa special. I'm Gugulethu Cele. Entrepreneurship has often been identified as the mechanization to help transform South Africa's economic plateau. But there are several challenges which pose obstacles to the development of small and medium enterprises in South Africa. We take a look at the sluggish economic growth, which is only expected to reach about 2% for 2015, the ongoing energy crisis that we face in the likes of Eskom, and the very small skills pool that we have available. But where there's a will, there's a way. And one such city that is finding a way is the city of Tshwane, which brings us to the Tshwane annual SMME fair taking place here in Pretoria, where the theme for this year is improvement, a logical form of change. Now, how do we manage to rope in this particular theme together with the struggles that entrepreneurs are facing and exploiting the opportunities that are presented to them? Well, I have a wonderful panel that is joining me this afternoon to help us exploit the ideas as well as the opportunity presented in entrepreneurship. To my left, I'd like to introduce them all. Ms. Tembeka Mhlekwa, Strategic Executive Director for Economic Development at the City of Tshwane. Next to her is Mr. Cele Mogaladi, Chief Executive of the Tshwane Economic Development Agency. Followed by Mr. Mncedisi Xego, Chief Executive of Royal Fields Finance, Mr. Yershen Pillay, the Chairman of the National Youth Development Agency, and Phumile Tshiredo, representing the Gauteng Enterprise Propeller. Well, they're not alone. We also have a panel of other guests who will be giving us their insights, mainly made up of two representatives of the entrepreneurship circle here in the city of Tshwane. First, we'd like to introduce Ms. Cynthia Mhlekwa. She is of Mafiswane Trading 47, followed by Ms. Portia Mngomezulu, the founder of Portia M Skincare Range. Mr. Kyle Cresswell, he's the technology advisor at Microsoft, joining us today. Also, Mr. Bonga Mncedisi. He's the head of regions for the Small Enterprise Finance Agency. So lots of voices that we're going to be hearing today, not only on the panel, but also with our other guests joining us today. But we also have a wonderful audience, many of whom are entrepreneurs themselves or people who work in affiliated industries and important stakeholders who'll be participating via a Q&A session today. So lots of questions, lots of answers, and lots of themes for us to unpack. Without any further ado, I'd like us to take a look at the current economic landscape of South Africa. As I've alluded to, the ongoing challenges in South Africa are not very present or pleasant, should I say, if I can start with you, Cele, to give us your perspective as to the current landscape. The playing field isn't even. We've got a struggling manufacturing sector in South Africa, plagued by the ongoing issues and ills in society. How are you, as a Teda, dealing with this?
Yeah, we do appreciate the fact that indeed the economy is sluggish, not very friendly to even the audience that we have brought together here as MMMEs, because chances of participating successfully within international markets are very slim. But what we have realized is that let's come together and begin to not only address the global picture, but to start with what we can afford in preparation. The economy is not going to be sluggish forever. So it's a passing phase. But we are not going to wait until there is an improvement and begin to say, but we should have done 1, 2, and 3 before we can ready ourselves for the penetration of international markets. So there are things that the SMMEs that we invited to the inaugural launch articulated. They themselves appreciate the difficulties that are happening within the economy, but we have said in the meantime, let's come together and address some of the housekeeping issues in readying ourselves for the bigger picture that's lying ahead. It's true that the economy is performing well, but the point that I'm buttressing is the fact that it's not going to be a permanent reality forever. There is some efforts that are taken by our government in making sure that we address some of the ills that are there, both in manufacturing but in other sectors of the economy. So we have to remain optimistic. We have to work towards making a difference, and we must actually, as a collective, be responsible for making it happen. So I'm very, very confident that we will get there.
I like your confidence and optimism, and clearly it does seem as though it's shared by your peers, especially in the local environment in Tshwane. And Tembeka, I'd like to come to you because clearly charity begins at home. And this ties in with the objectives that the city of Tshwane has highlighted with its vision for 2055.
You know, the Tshwane situation is a very interesting one. We're sitting in a very difficult situation because we have an economy that is growing faster than the provincial and the national economy. But the reality is that economy is not creating jobs. And also we have another situation which has its own unintended consequences, where we've got a number of academic institutions in the city. And what would happen then, young people go and study in the institutions in Tshwane, and when they are done, they don't leave the city, and that increases the number of unemployed youth in the city. And therefore it says we're sitting with young people who are qualified, who are skilled, who are unemployed. And that on its own is creating bigger challenges for us, because most of them, when we bring in skills development programs, they are not interested in them because they believe that they've got qualifications. And I think what needs to happen in terms of the Tshwane 2055 vision, we encouraging young people to look for sectors that have got skills that can match with the qualifications that they have. But the sad part is some of them don't want to start at the bottom. That's the first issue. And the second thing, the others are not patient enough to soldier on. I'll make a good example. On the Vision 2055, we're also interested in making sure that, emphasizing the fact that manufacturing sector is important. We've started a tooling initiative as part of one of the interventions. And most young people do not want to go to the 3-year training program. And that on its own is saying that sector is key for us, given the fact that as the city, we're the automotive hub of the country, and therefore the tooling sector is key for the manufacturing sector and a feeder to the automotive sector. That's one issue. And also, I think one of the important things that also needs to happen is also young people looking for opportunities that are not there. Because when we talk about SMMEs, with due respect, the majority would want to do what their neighbors are doing. And the country is importing more than exporting. And we need to encourage young people to be innovative, to look into sectors that are not there, to look for opportunities that are not there, and start creating products that are for the export market. That will help us as the country in terms of our GDP. But the sad part is we want quick wins. If the neighbor has a hair salon that is doing exceptionally well, we want to do that. That's not going to take us to the 2055 vision. So those are the challenges that we're experiencing.
I'm happy you've highlighted two of the key pointers that have come through, no doubt, from today's agenda, being youth as well as access to markets. And when we say youth, Yershen, it's obvious that we obviously look at you to get some guidance here. We heard from the MMMC just a moment ago when he was giving us his analogy of the dynamics in South Africa. The average age of a South African is 24 years old. 60% of the Tshwane population is made up of the youth. The problems and challenges highlighted by Tembeka, I'm sure you experience them at a national level too.
We do, and but the positive side of it is that there are a lot more opportunities in as much as there are challenges. And it's the youth who need to be at the forefront of taking those opportunities. For example, if the city of Tshwane is going to focus on developing its automotive industry, we currently have a shortage of 20,000 motor mechanics in the country. Young people can easily be skilled, not only to be employed as motor mechanics, but further to start up and run their own motor mechanic workshops. And that's where we come in as the NYDA to provide that kind of funding, for example, to say to a young person, if there is potential in this industry, be trained, be skilled, and start up your own business and run a motor mechanics workshop in the city of Tshwane for that matter. So it involves firstly creating a lot more education and awareness on entrepreneurship, but also coordination. There's a lot of work being done by government, the private sector, and civil society. If we coordinate that, and that's the role of the NYDA, to promote coordination, but also to facilitate collaboration. And if we do that, we can then nurture a culture of entrepreneurship amongst the youth, but also to drive development of youth-owned SMMEs. We're also focusing on saying, let's identify the strategic industries that are either new or rapidly growing. Agriculture, agro-processing, ICT, the green economy for that matter. And where there are opportunities for young people in these strategic industries, let's provide the financial and non-financial support to allow them to take up those opportunities. So indeed there are challenges, but I think that we can really change the picture to make it a brighter one by promoting information, guidance and support for young people to take up those opportunities.
So the opportunities are there. Let's work towards this vision of 2055, especially with regard to the youth in Gauteng and in Tshwane, and overall for the development of youth across South Africa. Phumile, I'd like to come to you. We also heard sentiments about the fact that maybe sometimes the youth tends to be a little bit lazy. Xolile, I'd like to come to you in a moment where you tell us about some of the lifestyle entrepreneurs that you've had to deal with who are in it for a quick buck. How do we begin changing the mindset of South African youth to move away from just being employees, but innovators, path takers who change the narrative of various industries in South Africa?
Thank you, Gugu. Before I actually even answer that one directly, I'd like to also acknowledge the fact that the economy is growing at a very slow pace, right? But I think I want to state that it is not necessarily a crisis, but a challenge that we're sitting with as a country. And when you have a challenge, then you must come up with strategies to say, how do we address those challenges? And one of the strategies that is there is enterprise development. And that is what Gauteng Enterprise Propeller is about, enterprise development, support these SMMEs and cooperatives. And youth is one of the targets that we're looking at to say, they have to begin to look at things differently. We come from the background that said to us, go to school, get your degree and try and find a job. But we now are progressing and we need to move out of that environment to say we need to become entrepreneurs. One of our really strategy is to encourage the culture of entrepreneurship, particularly amongst the youth, to say, look beyond being a manager, look beyond being a senior employee, but look into becoming an employer yourself. And that is possible. If you look at all the devices, all the drivers that the government has put in place to make it possible for youth, I want to say to youth today, it is possible, it is doable, but they need to come out. They need to think out of the box. All of the interventions that exist in all the agencies that are here today, the city of Tshwane is doing a lot of work in that regard. It is all there for them. They just have to come out and request what is there for them to be assisted with. And they need really, somebody was saying, perhaps they are lazy. They aren't really lazy. I think it is also coupled with, I would say, an entitlement mentality. The mentality that says, government owes me something because I'm a youth in this country. That is not correct. It has to be corrected. That is not the truth. The truth is the government is saying to you, I provide you an opportunity to do much better than you'd have done as an employee. And that opportunity is to start your own business. The government is providing all mechanisms there can be to get started, to get supported, which is what we also do, and to keep you sustainable as a business. And therefore, I think it is possible. They just have to stand up and get searching for those.
Not sitting in a corner and wondering how they're going to get it, as we heard from our program director earlier on today. Mncedisi, I'd like to rope you in here because this significant focus on the youth, does it place us in a position where we potentially ostracize people who are more experienced, people who have the knowledge, people who have the skill space, and how do we build up a relationship where there can be a transference there? And I say this because of your experience having come from the corporate sector, having had your hand held by someone else who was more experienced before taking up your own role with your financing institution.
Gugu, I think that it's very important that in looking at the situation, one needs to adopt an integrated approach. I don't think that it's one or the other. We basically need to ensure that the economy is firing on all cylinders. How do we do that? We basically need to ensure that we utilize our resources, optimally. It's very important, of course, that we must get the young people getting involved in the economy. But what's also important is that we need to, that there is a lot of research out there that proves that, people who are more likely to succeed in business, it's people who've basically worked, who have got the experience, and when they leave basically their long-term employment, they are able to start businesses utilizing the experience that they have, and they have got a better chance. But that does not necessarily mean that we must support experienced entrepreneurs at the expense of young people. There are many opportunities that are being presented to young people. So I think that we need to adopt an integrated approach. I think that what's also important, I just want to give one example. When we started our company in 2008, we started our company at the height of the financial crisis in the United States of America. And there were two schools of thought. One was that, guys, you are starting a financial services company. It's going to be very risky. You've got a lot of banks failing in America. You're going to fail. But there was also another school of thought that was basically saying, because there is a financial crisis, A lot of banks, they are going to tighten up their lending criteria. As a result of that, you're going to have a lot of people basically being excluded from financial access. And somebody said to us, this is the best time to basically start your businesses. And that's the same approach that we take as Royal Fields right now, is basically to say to people out there that whilst the economy is in a state that it is, what you need is a working together. Government needs to understand that it needs to be very efficient in terms of rolling out all its programs, because those programs, they hold hope for small businesses, they hold hope for big business. So what we're basically saying is that, for example, if you look at our infrastructure development programs, there is a massive opportunity there for small businesses to get in and involved. So from our perspective, basically to say that there are industries that we can look at. For example, if you look at renewable energy, we've got problems at ESCOM. It presents opportunities for people now to look at alternative sources of energy. As young people, we need to look at it and say, how do we get involved? Waste management. There's always going to be waste. We need now to recycle that waste. How do we get involved in that? The ICT sector, we are busy laying optic fiber throughout the country. How do we get? So we need to sit down and say, whilst the economy is experiencing the difficulties, where are the opportunities? So we need to research, we need to analyze.
The truth of the matter is that all of this starts with money. Nothing is going to get started unless it's a bankable project and there's
Correct.
capital available to actually exploit these opportunities. I'd like to stay with you on this one, Mncedisi, given the fact that you've highlighted that you do provide funding and loans to other organizations. And maybe this ties in with the expectation that Tembeka had set, that when it comes to the youth, it's fast money. I want to succeed and I want to succeed now. And you've walked us through some of the experiences. You've been reported as saying that you had to learn the hard way, that there are people who are dishonest and people who are not trustworthy when it comes to being SMME owners in South Africa. Walk us through that and the distinction that you as a financer have to take in having a very tough and critical assessment criteria before you actually give someone money to expand on their project.
I think, Gugu, what's very important, I mean, it's been said here that when you get into business, you don't look at what your friend is doing. You don't look at what your neighbor is doing. You don't look at like the latest hot business to get involved in. You basically need to assess what is your skill, what is your passion, where do you think you can impact change. Business is about passion. Business is about is about doing what you like the most. So when we look at funding SMMEs, that becomes very important for us. We like to see that passion. Obviously, there's other things as well, like the work ethic. There are a whole lot of people who, when they're asked, why are you going into business? They would say, I want to be my boss. I like flexibility. And the reality of the matter is that when you run your business, you actually become everything in your business. You're the secretary, you're the cleaner, you're the tea person. There's no distinction, there's no division of roles. So really what we encourage, when people go into entrepreneurship, what we're really looking for. Because when you look at small businesses, you're not looking at a thriving business, you're not looking at a mature business. It's really all about backing up, like the right jockey, but the horse as well has got to make sense. So that's what financiers, they focus on at the early stages of a business. That we've got here a person who's very passionate, a person who seems to know what he's doing. He is in the right industry as well. That's very important as well. For example, a lot of people, they like going into the construction industry. There's nothing wrong with that. But then what you find is that once there's an oversupply, price becomes a problem, because now you can't price correctly. The point is that you need to be smart and say, where are the industries where there aren't a lot of players? Especially South Africa presents opportunities, especially for black-owned enterprises. You look at industries where there aren't a lot of, like black participants, and you say that industry, it might be hard work, but I'm going to go into that one. So there are a lot of opportunities.
Seeking opportunities quite clearly here for funding, and that does come across as always a big topic and theme. So I'd like to get your perspective in a moment together with you, Yershen, but we do have Bonga, who represents the Small Enterprise Finance Agency. Maybe if you can also come in here in this part of the conversation with regard to the strict criteria when it comes to funding.
Well, of course, in terms of funding, you need to have some sort of bells and whistles as to how you need to fund a person. You cannot have a situation where you would have somebody walking in and say, I want a loan, and then you just grant it without checking in the person that this person is the right jockey, as Mncedisi has just mentioned, or the horse that is riding is also the correct, and he is a right fit in terms of the industry that is playing in. And there are many other factors, of course, that you need, as a financier, take into consideration before you can say you are strict in it. And in many in the industries that in the agencies that we have, and in more in particular in our in the space that we are playing in, we are more flexible in terms of the youth. Of course, we are saying that in terms of the youth, we can give you funding without security, which is one of our flagships in terms of the funding that we provide. And in other agencies, of course, they do have this. So we are flexible. And other agencies, they've realized that there is barriers to entry into entrepreneurship, which is provided by financiers. And we're trying very hard to be flexible in terms of that.
Yershen, as well as Solly, maybe if you two can come in here, because sometimes there is abuse of the system, especially at the NYDA, and even from a government level where you provide loans. You're not even expecting anything in return here. You're not even emphasizing that these businesses need to be successful in order for you to make a return on your investment. Don't we run the risk here of just splashing out money to people who are not even passionate about this initiative? Solly, let's start with you, and Yershen, I'll get your insights.
Thank you very much, Gugu. I think that point is appreciated. We have learned lessons around reckless lending, and these are lessons that we must use in order to avoid problems that come, for example, with funding that it's not directed towards accomplishment of particular set goals. So we can't get into that space. That is why it is important, and it's a point that Mncedisi made during his presentation. The fact that perhaps we should consider making sure that funding is not something that we mentioned right at the start of the process. It is actually something that must be understood as an enabler. And if that is the understanding that funding is an enabler, there is an appreciation of some of the steps that need to be taken towards certain goals, so that whatever you do in that particular process, then you begin to appreciate that there's going to be a need for funding. But what is it that you have demonstrated in that process, Gugu? You have demonstrated the resilience to move forward. You have demonstrated the capacity to move from one step to the next. And that is justification enough for why funding should be granted. If you don't do that, the dangers are that you are going to get funding that is, it's like in a normal budgeting process. You don't just splash out money because somebody has asked for a particular sum of money. You splash out money in terms of budgeting because you are convinced about some of the clear-cut objectives that this particular individual needs to. So the same rule applies to SMMEs. If you are able to demonstrate how you are going to be taking your business from point A to point B, that in itself is justification enough for funding agencies like, for example, Royal Fields, to have an ear to your cries and begin to give you that concrete support. So there are conditional necessities. And where we come in as Teda, in collaboration with our sister department, the Department of Economic Development in the city of Tshwane, is to make sure that there is consciousness around those matters. There is an appreciation of the importance of making sure that we don't just take business plans forward for the sake of doing that, but we do take business plans that carry commercial viability with them. We do take business projects that have bankability with them. That's what guarantees funding. And in that sense, it doesn't become difficult because you are able to demonstrate gains and yields out of that process.
Yershen, you agree?
I fully agree, and I think that, yes, financial support is important. And when we started the NYDA grant program, we had to clarify that it wasn't just free money. You had to have a thorough due diligence that was first needed, that you had a 12 to 24-month mentorship, because mentorship is quite critical to the success of any business. And then there was entrepreneurship development training. And of course, you would have the young people, some of whom would come just to take a chance to get that money. But I don't think that the perception is that all young people simply want access to money. Not at all. I think young people do want to break free from poverty. They want to start small. They want an opportunity, and they need the support. And then we also launched initiatives such as the Buy Youth campaign, because in as much as young people can access opportunities, the private sector needs to start buying from youth-owned enterprises. The state needs to be buying. And we encouraged, state entities and private sector companies to procure from youth-owned enterprises. And government is also running a campaign, in as much as we may have teething problems in some of these initiatives, but sometimes the smaller, things such as paying service providers within 30 days can have a major impact, especially if you are a youth-owned SMME for that matter, or an SMME in general. So I think, yes, we need to focus on the financial side, but the non-financial aspect of supporting, especially a youth-owned SMME, is quite critical if we're going to develop a cohort of young, successful entrepreneurs.
Unfortunately, we have to take a quick ad break, but do stay with us. We'll continue our discussion looking at financing, alternative sources of mentorship and skills availability, and actually speak to some people who have benefited from the Tshwane Economic Development Agency and its initiatives, which have brought us here today. Don't go anywhere. A warm welcome back to this Tshwane SMME Fair for 2015, where the conversation is certainly getting heated. I'd like us to venture into the issue of additional support in the form of mentorship. But before we do that, I'd like, and we've also got questions from the floor, which we'll delve into in a moment, but I'd like to speak to some of the entrepreneurs that we have at the table sitting by who have gone through this process of needing funding and obviously being able to achieve it. Portia, maybe let's start off with you very briefly. Number one, the challenges that you faced, and two, where the money came from and how it's actually assisted in your aid.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Portia Mngomezulu, the founder of the brand name Portia M Skin Solutions. We are a proudly South African brand of skincare products. We're trading with the likes of Massmart and Pick n Pay, and we actually hold an award from Teda, which is an Emerging Exporter Award and an Overall Exporter Award. We are also exporting our products to other African countries, such as Zambia, Botswana, and Swaziland, and we're hoping to get to the northern parts of Africa as well. With the help of Teda, we've been able to be nominated to go to Congo, to the Republic of Congo, to be able to market our products there. And not only that, they also helped us through the SABS to get our products approved. They are still working on that. Currently, our products are clinically tested by the SABS, but of course, there are extra tests that are still needed to be done.
We'll leave it there because you raised two important issues here. The access to markets, which is something that all entrepreneurs need, because you can open up a car wash, but if there are no cars coming through, then you're not going to have accessibility to that. Phumile, I'd like to come to you very quickly as to what GEP actually does with regard to that. Some kind of mentorship. And Cele and Tembeka, I'd like to rope you in here before we get some questions from the floor.
Gugu, mentorship is one of the very critical aspects in this whole enterprise development thing. Like you've just said earlier on, that we're sitting with risk. It is huge risk we're sitting with, and we do take that risk, like Tembeka was saying. But of course, it is the state money that we're using, it is the taxpayers' money that we're using, so that risk has to be calculated. And in terms of coming up with strategies to mitigate that risk, mentorship becomes one of those. Because how we basically go about giving loans and funding to SMMEs is to look into the idea than into everything else that goes around an entrepreneur. We've tried to make the criteria a little easier than banks, because we believe that the entrepreneurs that approach us are entrepreneurs that have been rejected by the banks or stand to be rejected by the banks because of certain backgrounds. So the criteria becomes lesser complicated and so on to make them to be able to meet the criteria. But that actually makes your risk more than what it would have been if you dealt with them as a bank. Now you need to have strategies, and mentorship is one of those. Now when you mentor, you basically are empowering an entrepreneur that you've given money to stay put in as far as implementing the business plan is concerned. You're trying to basically make sure that they implement accordingly, like Mr. Xego was alluding earlier on to say, you have to implement accordingly. And strategies like an aftercare support that we as an agency, GEP, have actually put in place as well, is one of those as well, to make sure that we take them through the process of implementing, because they do not know everything. They might be good in production, focusing on what they do, but financial management is another thing. Marketing the business is another thing. Collecting from those that owe you is another thing. And that is what mentorship is about, to educate them even more, to say, how do you manage all aspects of your business to ensure that you remain sustainable and you are able to even pay back the money that you've been funded by from GEP or any other agency, so that we are able to fund another business again, and another business, and another business. So mentorship is very, very important, and it is important for the entrepreneurs to understand that, because like I think Mr. Pillay was saying earlier on, entrepreneurs will approach you and they're looking for money, but then there has to be responsibility and accountability. So we want them to support strategies like mentorship, because we need their involvement and participation and full availability, because it is to ensure that sustainability is achieved at the end of the day, and it is in the interest of their businesses.
Access to markets was something else that Portia had highlighted. Solly, very quickly, if we can come to you as to how the thinking needs to change there, because you can service so many people in the city of Tshwane, but truth be told, the world is your oyster, especially starting on the African continent, where inter-African trade only sits at about 12%. I'd also like us to cross to Kyle, who will also give us some perspective as to how we can use technology with regard to this, because if you've got the Wi-Fi available, then why can't you email your neighbor who is sitting somewhere else in sub-Saharan Africa to actually communicate with them and begin some kind of trade?
Yeah.
Solly, let's start with you.
Thanks, Gugu. We have been very careful not to want to get into a space of duplicating resources as Teda, because one, we have recognized that it's not our fundamental mandate to be taking SMMEs effectively into the international market, but to do a strategic facilitation role. We do work with the Export Insurance Development Corporation around that particular question to make sure that the likes of, for example, Portia get to that space. When it comes to issues like mentoring and others, again, it's not something that is directly as a trade and investment promotion agency within our purview. But what we have done is to begin to understand all the nuances within that value chain, which is the reason why we are responsible for this platform, so that we get to understand what is it that it's an outstanding question, so to speak, outstanding issues, and make sure that strategically we take our SMMEs along and to make sure that that really happens. So the value add that we come up with as Teda is to make sure that we don't tell you about EIDC, we don't tell you about royal fields, but we actually make sure that your inroads into royal fields, it's something that almost has 100% guarantee. If you look at our coexistence, for example, with the city of Tshwane, I'm aware that the Department of Economic Development is running fully fledged mentorship programs for the SMMEs. So we're not into that space because we could be risking the melee of duplication of resources.
Exactly. I'd like to come to you, Carl, here to help us how we can advance by taking advantage of technology to help us propel not only the access to markets, but understanding the knowledge and finding these mentors available in the SMME sector.
Thank you very much. So just the one thing that's been mentioned a lot here is youth and SMEs, right? So they need guidance. They need a hero, right? What is that hero? That hero is technology. And technology helps SMEs grow 15% more revenue. They grow jobs 2 times faster, as well as things like they are 6 times more likely to have international clients. So Solly, to your point, yes, technology will help enable that SME to get international clients. So we've actually got an initiative running that you can actually go to it right now. Any of you got your devices here? You can go to southafrica.bizforafrica with a K.com. And things like, so Microsoft's definitely passionate about SMEs. So things on this portal that you guys can get at SMEs, youth wanting to start up their own businesses. Things are like their own free website for a full year. Things like their own domain. Because some businesses that start up use commercial Gmail, Outlook.com, and you want to look very, very professional in terms of that. So having a domain for a full year to help that SME get up that first year. So yeah, that's the initiative that we got running from a Microsoft perspective.
one of the private sector participants, as we heard from the MMMC and the City of Tshwane, which are helping to contribute to the development of small and medium enterprises in the city. We did have several questions. I would like us to take 2 at a time, and if we can keep the questions very brief and maybe in line with some of the themes that we've highlighted, but also paying attention to some of the areas that you'd like us to address.
My name is Tato Maswabela, and my company name is Yershen Pillay Ltd. My question will be succinct and very briefly. I applied for a grant program for the NYDA, and we have received a grant, and we have started manufacturing our cleaning product. So I want to comment on NYDA on the good work that they are doing. So I will really add on that and say, may they go to the rural areas as well, establish branches, and get more youth engaged as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yershen, I think your job's been done for you there. Free marketing and advertising for the NYDA. We had another question at table number 22.
My name is Mncedisi Xego. I'm from Hammanskraal. I am a ceramic manufacturer. Actually, my comment is that I want to thank Mr. Yershen Pillay for the NYDA stellar job. Everything was incredible. You guys are helping us a lot. To Mr. Mogaladi, Lekaipa. I'm from Hammanskraal, and we have this problem of Babelegi industrial site, which is highly being vandalized, and it's been broken to. The cables are missing. The Nyaupe boys are making it a haven for them to cave in and stay there. And then once you go there and you want to access factory space, it becomes problematic because they say that you firstly need to go to the NWDC, which is in Mafikeng. And then once you do that, the NWDC say, no, you must consult with the City of Tshwane. So we're having this battle and this dialogue which we do not understand what is happening. And then if you can answer that for us to where should we actually go to access factory space, and what kind of funds and what kind of accesses and machinery can we actually get from the City of Tshwane as soon as we have developed such factories, and then we've trained, because right now I've trained about young people, 9 of them, and then everything is going incredible. So thank you very much for your attention.
Mncedisi and Tato, thank you very much for your questions and comments. We would like to get a quick response from Solly here, and then we'll come to this side of the room where there is a question at table number 4. We'll take 2 and another one further down there. But Solly, from your perspective?
Thank you very much, Mncedisi, for that question. The issue of the industrial estates in the City of Tshwane is a matter that is receiving ongoing attention. It is true that the complications around land ownership between the Northwest Province and the Gauteng Province, and in this case in particular the City of Tshwane, it's something that we need to unlock in order to strategically make sure that the access issues that we are referring to become easy. However, even if that is the case, there are businesses that are operating there. We do acknowledge and we've appreciated the extent of the problem with regard to the maintenance of those industrial estates. There is a memorandum of understanding that the city is getting into with the Northwest Development Corporation that is seeking to address those particular irritations, such as, for example, the maintenance of the industrial estates. It's not only that area in the north of Hammanskraal, we are experiencing the same problem, for example, with Zone 16 in Ga-Rankuwa. And we will be addressing those particular issues from all those 2 fronts. So we will definitely make sure that we carry you along in that particular problem. We are sitting with the management of the Northwest Development Corporation to try and iron out that. But what we will be working on, because we can't just leave the businesses that are operating currently in those industrial estates unattended to in terms of their needs, expectations around the cleaning of the grounds, cutting of tall grasses and so on. It's a space that we are going to get into through, for example, the program that the acting executive mayor was talking about, of making sure that we get our cooperatives through the Tsepo 10,000 program to make sure that they operate in businesses that are clean. There cannot be an excuse why we can't do that work. And the bigger strategic issues, we are getting our principals to also sort these matters out because they tend to be interprovincial. But let's talk some more so that we get to understand the details around your frustrations in particular, and we are willing to unlock them.
Thank you so much. Mncedisi seems pleased with your response. We'll come back to that gentleman at table number 22 and the two other tables in the background. But first, let's start up here in front. If you could introduce yourself, ma'am, and pose your question. And there's been a hand behind the gentleman there. There we go. We'll start there.
Good day, everyone. I'm Balin Gavinde, and I co-own a talent organization called Clientscape. My question that I wanted to pose is actually to the NYDA, Mr. Yershen Pillay. To what extent do you really work with government in changing our policies that will help the youth in becoming high achievers? For example, in your presentation today, you mentioned that you're looking at making entrepreneurship as a curriculum, but will we accept a pass mark of 30%?
Oh. Mbali, thank you so much for your question. Yershen will come to you briefly for that response. There's a gentleman who's had his hand up there. I think it's table number 13. If you could keep your question or comment brief, sir.
Good day. My name is Eddie, and my company is called Capital M Holdings. So we basically deal with marketing and crisis communications, branding, and everything. So I was actually thinking about the mentorship program. So when I present this, as much as funding is important, when I get to the NYDA, I actually need tailor-made mentorship, especially for what is a mainly white-dominated industry when it comes to comms. It is very hard for them to for me to get a mentor who actually knows what I'm talking about. And I was wondering, how can we address such issues? Because, like I said, it's a white-dominated industry. And for a person like me to try and penetrate such a market, it is near impossible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. We'll take the quick responses before coming back to the gentleman there with the question. Yershen, let's start off with you. Very interesting and important question posed by Mbali. How closely do you work with government with regard to policy changes and entrepreneurship included in the curriculum?
Well, you know, the decision by government to locate the NYDA as the only state entity in the office of the president was a deliberate one. And the objective of that was to say that the NYDA has got to cascade through both national, provincial, and local levels of government, interact with various agencies. There was a time, Solly will tell you, when we never interacted with Teda, but now we do. We're actually forging partnerships to look at how do we share best practice models, what are some of the examples that we can take forward. And so the advantage of having an agency that plays this golden thread that can cross-cut across different levels of government, across different layers of government, is that we can then organize platforms. There was a presidential youth in Daba, followed by a national youth policy conference, where young people, and this is where I think we must really commend the youth of South Africa, stood up and said that we don't want a 30% pass rate. Actually, we think even 40% is too low for us. And the question was asked, why does the country not have faith or hope in us as the youth? By young people. To such an extent that the mandate was given then to the NYD to go to the Department of Basic Education, which led to the task team review of the 30% pass rate. So it was young people who led that process. And I think often at times we forget the good work that is done by young people themselves to start a process that changes policy and legislation through the systems and instruments that government has put in place. And that's what I was talking about when I say youth must lead and government will support. So that matter is a prime example of some of the good work that has led to the changing of the pass rate, for that matter, or the recommendations to change the pass rate, and also to bring in career guidance so that we link career guidance to entrepreneurship development in the long run.
Thanks for that, and to Mbali for that question. We move to Elina, and I'd like to come to you, Mncedisi. Maybe you can help us out here together with Phumile, but bringing the marketer to the marketers. Custom-made mentorship programs that address the needs of those individuals in particular fields. Should engineers be speaking to engineers? And if we do have examples of that in the audience, we'd also like to get their feedback. But from you?
Gugu, we discussed this earlier on. I mean, it's an area where there's a particular difficulty in. What I always say is that, and this is exactly what's been said there, is that I always say that mentoring is about chemistry. Mentoring, but also it's about having somebody that you can look up to. When he basically says to you, this is how you do it, you don't have to question it. My latest is, I call it, like the Sangoma effect. People who are coming from, like the townships. When the Sangoma there says, this is how you do it, nobody questions it. It's gospel.
Yeah.
People, they will just do it because he or she said it's so. So that's basically what we're trying to sort of we've started with mentoring, but we've been having difficulties in terms of getting the right people to mentor our businesses. And this is the challenge that I would pose to CNBC Africa, is that we are basically looking at inviting retired business people, business people who feel that they would like to plow back to the community in terms of getting involved in mentorship programs. But also what's more important, I mean, he was talking about now, the whole element of, he's a black person running a business where he says that there is a scarcity of, like mentors when it comes to black people. But for me, there's an opportunity there. South Africa is the rainbow nation. How do we bridge that, divide? For me, there's an opportunity for experienced, like white business people who have retired to basically say that this is an opportunity for us to work with young, emerging black business people. What's going to happen is that there's going to be an osmosis where there's a transfer of culture, where there's a transfer of, you can learn from a young person. So what I always say is that we must not discount the fact that because you're white, you can't learn from a black person, or because you're black, you can't learn from a successful and established, like white business person. But the issue is, how do you construct that program? So the challenge for me is the country looking at, especially with the program that's now been announced by the government, that there's a 2.1 billion rand that's going to be made available for mentoring. The issue is that how do we ensure that we are providing structured and high impact mentoring? The only way is to ensure that the successful, experienced business people and professionals, they do participate in that. And I think that organizations like yours, they can be at the center of basically encouraging these people to take part in that process. So it's a challenge to CNBC.
We'll take you up on that one, Mncedisi. Collaboration, how has that assisted you in your attempts, Cynthia, in hopefully achieving your objectives as an SMME? And also, where are we lacking so that we follow through with the theme of today's conference, improvement in the SMME sector?
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cynthia Mhlekwa. I'm from a company called Mafiswane Trading 47. We're basically a construction company. I specialize in tiling, plumbing, and renovations of all the houses. So at this moment, I'm representing the incubators in Atteridgeville, Pretoria. I'm one of them, and what I'd like to say is that being on the program is a 3-year program. Being on that program has helped me a lot, because of now I can say I've got skills of running the company, I've got knowledge, and I've got technical support. Like the gentleman was saying, Mr. Mncedisi, you cannot say you are in a construction company if you don't understand the industry. 14 years ago, I was working for Tile Africa. It's a tiling company where we sell tiles. I was a sales advisor. And after resigning, after working there for 14 years, I thought I know construction because I was selling tiles, I was doing plumbing, and I was doing tiling, and we selling paint stuff. Then going into the program has actually helped me to understand the technical part of construction, of running day-to-day of construction business. And it's very vital to know the technical part of construction, because if you don't know it, you won't be able to run the construction company. So I would like to thank Tshwane for nominating the incubation program. I'd like to thank them a lot for giving us the opportunity as the youth to actually learn and get more information and knowledge and skills, because we really do need to be mentored. As they mentioned, that mentoring is very important, because if you don't get mentored, you won't be able to success in the business. We don't want a business of 2 years or 3 years. We want to have a business that is sustainable, that we can create jobs, that we can employ youth that is still coming. We've got a lot of youth that are unemployment at the moment, they're unemployed. And as the SME, it's our duty to make sure that we create a platform that will also create jobs for those youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the comments that you shared. I'd like us to get closing comments and following through with that particular theme of collaboration, which has come through. Obviously, the youth involvement here, private sector, do we need incentives, collaboration of funders with the non-funders? Phumile, from your perspective, the future of SMMEs in South Africa on the back of this theme, improvement, a logical form of change.
Collaboration is a very important one, and I think I want to stress that it is actually happening. It may not be at an ideal state right now, but it is happening. We're collaborating a lot amongst the agencies and the departments as well. Hence, we're all sitting here today and giving the information from the same platform. But we've even gone further to becoming one-stop shop type of entities, because we want to save you time as well. We don't want to be sending you around. We want to save you time. You come in here, you get everything that you need, and that which you cannot get, then we are able to refer you to the next agency. But it is happening. It is very important, and we must just continue and strengthen it in that direction.
Thank you so much, Phumile. Yershen, your closing comments?
No, I think as we drive reindustrialization in the country, youth, especially us as the youth, must be at the forefront of reindustrializing our economy. And this also means playing our part. It has to be a two-way street. And I'll close by an example of a partnership that the NYDA has with Mintech right now in Priska. The very tiles that Cynthia is talking about in the construction industry, some of those tiles are being produced by a minerals beneficiation partnership where young people, 40 cooperatives, are actually manufacturing tiger's eye, semi-precious stone found in Priska, into tiles, which are then supplying the value chain that was spoken to earlier. In the past, we were buying those tiles at 10 times the price from foreign countries. So this is an example of cooperatives, youth at the forefront of reindustrialization, and that is the only way that we are actually going to transform our productive economy and our economy as a whole.
To come to you, your closing comments before we wrap the conversation up, especially from the finances perspective.
I think what's very important for us is we would like to see the partnership between government and finance companies, continue. One of the challenges that we still have is when we get SMMEs coming to us looking for funding. Obviously, the point that you might want to secure that you do get paid, and it's sometimes critical that state entities, they must facilitate, those arrangements. Tshwane is one of those entities that are basically working with us, but generally what you tend to find is most government entities, they will say, we're not interested. We've given him a contract, he must see what to do with it. If he can't get funding, he must give it back. I don't think that that's the approach that we should promote. We are all about empowering SMMEs. If you give a person an opportunity and they cannot act on it because they can't access finance, you need to see how do you facilitate the funding. That's one of the biggest areas that we are working on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. To come to Cele, your closing comments, especially with regard to the kind of progress we can make moving forward on improving the landscape of SMMEs in South Africa.
Okay. I think, Gugu, the point that I would like to stress is still on the theme of collaboration and working together and deriving synergies in the process, but harping on the importance of looking out at ourselves as SMMEs. We are operating at different levels of development as we are gathered here today. That in itself provides a unique space and opportunity for us to collaborate as SMMEs. Let alone from the perspective of the agencies that are here, but SMMEs within their own space to collaborate. I mean, the gentleman earlier on was asking the question around who can help me in the business that I'm doing, because there are few. We want to make it possible that we turn these particular platforms also into what could be understood as a community of practice. We have got a common agenda. The common agenda is how do we steer our businesses forward? And within that space, those that have made it will always have the responsibility to make sure that they impart that knowledge to those that are coming behind them. At the level of the organizations themselves, those of us who are seated here, that collaboration is going to be expressed successfully to the extent to which we are able to, for example, utilize optimally the resources that we have as a collective, and that can only find expression in avoiding duplication of these resources. But I also wanted to spend half a minute on just a tip of an iceberg in terms of what can be expected with regard to the SMME that will be fair that will be coming next year. We have, the defining feature of these events have always been that we take note of what is being raised and make sure that we become responsive in the process. So we have heard about the importance of mentorship, the idea, which was a challenge that was also posed to yourselves, of making sure that we have people that have been there. It has to be a definitive characteristic of next year's SMME Fair. But we are also saying that we are going to be providing opportunities for pitching sessions as well, so that you are going to have an opportunity where, as SMMEs, you directly interface with those that are going to be doing this. I mean, Tembeka earlier on spoke about philanthropic investors. To what extent are we sort of exploiting that as an opportunity? Yeah. We want to identify them, make sure that they're here, so that you can pitch your businesses, they can listen to what you're saying, and make sure that we are all ready to implement the joint venture opportunities that we speak about.
Tembeka, to close things off with you.
For us to have an economy that is resilient, inclusive, and sustainable, as it is outlined in our 2055 vision, I believe that the youth of this country can provide us with the solutions that we require so that we can turn the tide around. But the youth must be dedicated, must be patient, must be committed, must be disciplined, and must know that they're in there for a long haul. Talking amongst ourselves also is not going to help us. Youth must talk to themselves. I mean, there are platforms where they can share their experiences and skills and challenges. And I believe that the solution lies with young people more than anything else. And there's platforms that we've created in the city, like the Tshwane Youth Business Forum. They should be sharing all these experiences and the challenges and network, and also saying to us what is it that will work for them. Because we've taken a conscious decision as the city for us to realize our goals. It's not for us to tell young people or business people what is required by them. They have to tell us what they need, but it has to be a commitment from their part to do the work.
Thank you so much for your closing comments. Well, the themes have been mentioned and highlighted, and it does seem as though, although our streamlines and paths might be different, but the objective and the final goal is the same. Working together, we can certainly reach and achieve a lot more through collaborative efforts and identifying synergies. Well, I'd like to say a big thank you to our audience members for joining us today. The questions that came from the likes of Mbali, Mduduzi, as well as Tato, and not forgetting our esteemed guests and panelists today who joined us, giving us and disseminating information about SMME development. For CNBC Africa, I'm Gugulethu. Until we meet again, this was the Tshwane SMME Fair for 2015.